Om Sthapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharmaswarupine avatara varisthaya Ramakrishnaya te namaha Sruti Smriti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavad Padam Shankaram Lokashankaram. So this is the last session of this particular topic that we have been discussing, Nasadiya Suktam. So after this we will begin a detailed discussion of what might be called the most important and the most profound philosophical text in Vedantic tradition, especially in Advaita Vedanta tradition, certain important sutras of Brahma Sutras. But today we are going to complete this Nasadiya Suktam, which I mentioned earlier. It comes in the Rigveda Samhita, the 10th mandala, 129th Suktam. And those of you who already know, there is no need to further to explain this again. The entire Rigveda Samhita is divided into 10 mandalas, 10 sections. Each mandala or section contains a number of hymns which are called in Sanskrit Suktam. Each hymn may have any number of verses called slokas. Now in this particular Nasadiya Suktam, which is one of the shortest, it has got only 7 verses, and we have already discussed the first 5 verses. Now we are going to discuss the 6th and 7th, which in a way are considered to be among the most profound and beautiful examples of Vedic poetry, where the Vedic poet is not saying something, he is asking some questions, some fundamental questions, some existential questions of the mystery of the universe, its origin, its nature, who can and who knows, who can know it and who knows it, who can recognize it. So very interesting. He doesn't give a conclusion, but it doesn't imply anything like agnosticism. What it says is, it beyond description. So the ultimate answer to the question, what is this existence? The ultimate answer is a long silence. So that's how the Sukta, this poem, the poetical masterpiece continues. I mean, the poet becomes silent. He's asking this question, from where this universe emerged? So, Iyam visrishti kutaha, it is last means. From where did this emerge? And then, kaha janati, who knows about it? The ultimate answer is, we can't say from where it emerged, and we can't say who knows about it. But you have to remember, in the 4th mantra, 4th verse, it says, Sato Bandhum Asadi Niravindan Hriti Pradeshya Kavayo Manisha. It actually amounts to some kind of an answer to this fundamental question, the existential question of the origin of the universe, or the mystery of the universe. So the answer is, Sato Bandhum Asadi Niravindan Hriti Pradeshya Kavayo Manisha. So Hridi, in fact, Hridi is Hridaya Guhayam, is Shankaracharya's definition of that particular expression when it occurs in the Upanishadic literature. Means in the innermost being of all of us. We can't say at the level of intellect or mind, somewhere within ourselves we realize. So the sages and saints went in search of an answer for this question. Ka iyam visrishtihi. So, kuta iyam visrishti. What is this creation? Visrishti means, Visheshena Srishti means this interesting, mysterious universe. What is it? And from where did it emerge? And who knows it? So, in the 4th mantra, there is an implication here, I mentioned this earlier. Kamastadagre samavartadadhi manaso reda pradham yadasid sato bandhum asadi niravindan hridi pradesha kavayo manisha. The ancient sages, they dwell deep into their own innermost being, and then finally they realized the supreme truth, which cannot be defined as an empirical existence or an empirical non-existence, which means it is a transcendental reality. So it cannot be answered as is or is not, a sat or asat. It can only be realized within our hearts. What it essentially tells us, this Atman was realized by the sages in their innermost hearts. That is the implication of the fourth mantra. But after this, interestingly, again the sage, he reached a level of reverie and finally asked the question, Ko adva veda kaiha pravochat, that comes in the sixth mantra. Kuda ajada kuda iyam visishtihi. This is very interesting. Kuta iyam visishti. From where did this universe emerge? And kaha adha veda kaiha pravochat. From where did it begin? And who knows or who can know the supreme truth? And then kuda ajada kuda iyam visishti. For what purpose? What's the purpose of creation? Now remember, it is very easy, it would have been very easy for a Vedic sage to say that God created this world. In fact, if you just pay your attention to the fundamental questions asked by modern agnostics and atheists, some of them Nobel Prize winning Nobel laureates, which I don't have to mention the names here, they often ask this question on international platforms. If your God is so wonderful, so powerful, and then this terrible world is the result of His creation, this all the world God could create, then you cannot credit that God with a lot of wisdom. It's very interesting. And then if the God had the wisdom and He created this world, then He should be a terrible kind of God. Because why should there be problems in this world? So many things, the coronavirus, natural calamities, all these, if God had so much of wisdom, so much of power, He could have created a much better world. So it's the main question, and I tell you, none of the established monotheistic religions, whether popular Hinduism, monotheistic Hinduism, or any of the Abrahamic religions, they have no answer. So, the world is a world of mysterious uncertainties. Again, it is not a road leading to agnosticism. The point is, once we realize that this world as world is essentially impermanent, then we don't worry too much about something that is impermanent. So we look for something that is beyond this world, that's something that is permanent, that is real, and that goes beyond, that transcends the is not equation, sat asat equation. We have to remember at the beginning, Nasadasid, no sadasid. No here means actually is English no means na. That is na asadasid, na sadasid. So, but in Sanskrit, in ancient Sanskrit, this na becomes no. So, in the beginning there was neither empirical existence nor empirical non-existence, something that defies definition at empirical level. Kuda ajada kuda iyam visishti arvang deva asya visajjanena atako veda yada ababhuva. So, it implies, says that after the world was created, then only, after several millions of years only, all the divine celestial beings came into existence. Of course, if you go to Sayana's commentary, you find Sayana is more earthly than actually what Vedic poets were. Sayana is a very down-to-earth, complete philosopher. So he tries to explain this on the concrete foundation of Advaita philosophy. So you feel it's much more intelligible. But Vedic poetry itself is not so easily intelligible. In fact, that itself is the power of the poetry. The poet he completes his poetical reverie, a kind of poetical contemplation in a state of transcendental silence. Iyam visisti yada ababhuva yadiva dadhe yadivana so asya adhyaksha parame vyoman so anga yadi veda yadivana veda. From whom did this world originate and who created this world? And he can, at his will, create or dissolve this universe. And the ultimate reality can be realized only when you transcend this is not equation. This is the essence of it. Now, I would like to explain this in the light of Sayana's commentary, because that perhaps gives a much more earthly interpretation. And then I would like to give an overall summary of the melody of this poetical masterpiece. And then I shall try to slowly introduce the next very important book which we are going to discuss for some time. It's the most profound, the most authentic text in Vedantic tradition, and apparently the most important philosophical work in Indian philosophical system. Now I will just read some portions of the commentary by Sayanacharya. So Sayana writes, Sa sishti durviknyanityaha kadva veda kaha purusha paramarthyana janati. So who can understand the nature of this universe in all its comprehensiveness? Kavaiva pravochat. And then Asmin loki prabhruyad. I mean, who could really understand all this universe from where this emerged. Iyam visishti vividha bhuda bhaudhiga bhoktru bhogyadurupena bahu prakaro drishyamana sishti kudaka kasma ubadana karana kuda ajada kasmacha nimitta karana samanta pradabhuda. So you can see how a great poetical masterpiece becomes a very, very simple concept in the hands of a philosopher. Yam visisti kutah kahajanadi. These are two questions in the sixth mantra, which continues in the seventh mantra. Who knows this mysterious universe? Because it means this mysterious universe is beyond empirical perception. And its nature also is a mystery. This is what the poet really wants to imply. Sayana says, this universe of different elements in the form of experiencer and experiences, enjoyer and objects of enjoyment. So, vividha bhuda bhautiga bhoktru bhogyadurupena bahu prapanchakara drishyamana srishti. So, the commentator, I'm just giving an example of how a great philosopher brings it down to the level of a philosophical concept. From where did this universe, which can be experienced in the form of different objects of enjoyment and different people enjoying those objects of enjoyment, and also these five elements. Kasmat upadana karanat, kasmacha nimitta karanat. Upadana karana means material cause. For example, gold is a material cause of golden ornaments. A pot made of clay, if you analyze this, you understand the upadana karana mean in Sanskrit language means material cause is the soil or clay is the material cause of pots and pans made of clay. So, what is the material cause? Nimitta karana means efficient cause. The pot maker, the one who makes jewelry, is the efficient cause of different ornaments. And gold is the material cause. So, what is the material cause of this universe? And who is the efficient cause of the universe? This is how Sayana brings it down to a philosophical concept. But you have to remember, Vedic poetry is a direct appeal, it's a direct attempt to explain what is beyond explanation. So, this mystery is something which cannot be explained. If it is explained, it's no longer a mystery. So, this world of multiple experiences, objects, we can't say from where it emerged, and we can't say what's the purpose behind, what is its nature. More or less, sometimes you find some of these poetical imaginations are very similar to some of the ideas you find in the 19th century Victorian poet, Percy Bysshe Shelley, Keats, Wordsworth, and so on. So very often you can flashes of that, the beauty and the charm of a poet who explores into the mystery of the unknown and the unknowable, beauty and charm of this universe. Etadubhayam samyak ko veda ko va vistarena vaktum shaknuyat nanu deva ajananda. So Sayana, the commentator, adds, he says, for Etadubhayam samyak ko veda, who understands these two, who knows these two mysteries? One is, that is, what is the material cause and what is the efficient cause. And Deva asya visarjanena jagada vyedadi bhudotpattehi anantaram arvarchinaha kradaha bhudasusteki paschat jataha. Now remember, Sayana's commentary is so mind-blowing, much bigger. I'm just selecting just a few sentences, expressions from Sayana, focusing on certain aspects. Sayana has written a very huge, very elaborately on each of these 7 mantras. So the commentary is quite extensive. So, yata karana krishnam jagat ajayada iti janati. So, what is the ultimate cause behind the emergence of this universe? No, this is a poet's exploration into the mystery of the universe, a different from the exploration of a philosopher, and still totally different from how a physicist, a scientist explores into the mystery of the universe. So it's a different category. The 7th mantra, iyam visishtihi yada ababhuva yadi va dada yadi va na yadsya adhyaksha parame vyoman santu angaveda yadi va na veda. So this indescribable, inexplicable mystery of the universe. Remember, the mystery in this mystery concept in Vedic tradition, in Vedantic tradition, ultimately led to the concept of Mithya or Maya in Vedanta, in the Upanishadic times and also in the works of Shankaracharya. There are many of the examples, like for example this rope and snake, and again the city in the sky, Gandharva Nagara or Rajju Sarpa, Sasabishana. Many of these stock phrases which are employed to describe different levels of reality in Vedanta, That is the conceptual reality, the empirical reality, and also the ultimate reality. Conceptual is pradibhasika, empirical is vyavahadika, and the ultimate supreme reality is paramarthika. Now, and also asat, that means the absolute non-existence, something that is even intellectually inconceivable. Asat is called. Now remember, all these ideas later led in the works of Shankaracharya to two important concepts of the inexplicable. One is Brahman, the other is Maya or Mithya. It's very interesting. So in the entire Vedantic literature, Vedantic philosophical literature, you come across only two fundamental concepts. One is, what is the ultimate reality? Ultimate in the sense, that which remains the same in the past, present and future. That transcends the limitations of time, space and causation. That's not born because it always exists. That never dies because it always exists. That never grows, decays or evolves because it doesn't change at all. So that ultimate reality is Brahman, which is the same in the triple states of human awareness or consciousness. In the waking state, deep sleep state, and also in dream state. We call it the Jagrat Avastha, Swapna Avastha and Sushupti Avastha. I mean, it's waking, the dream and the deep sleep or dreamless sleep stage. The same. So this is the only reality. Now, the Vedantic philosophers, very much like the Rigvedic poet, is perplexed by the idea that what about the world in which we are living? It is there, but it is certainly not there in the same fashion after some time. It changes. If it is changing, it is not non-existent because though it is changing, it is experienced. But it is not absolute reality because it is not the same all the time, it changes. So that is something which defies, which transcends, which challenges your definition and description or even intellectual comprehension. And they called it something like this: the great wonder, the great mystery, the great inexplicable, Mahadbhuta Anirvachaniya Rupa. Shankaracharya puts in Viveka Chudamani. It is the great mystery, the great wonder. It cannot be defined as absolute reality, but it is certainly not absolutely unreal because we are part of it, we experience it. So these are two concepts that you find in Vedanta. One is Maya or Mithya, which is also inexplicable, non-definable, indescribable. And Brahman, that is also indescribable, non-definable, inexplicable. But for two reasons. Brahman is beyond description because it's beyond any tools of perception or understanding or definition. So sarva pramanavati, it is beyond the tools of theory of knowledge, beyond the tools of epistemology. This one important. So it is supreme. Maya, on the other hand, it is really non-existent. But the moment but so long as you don't realize its impermanent nature, its changeability, it is the only thing that you know. So the world is actually Maya or Mithya. It is non-eternal or impermanent, and for that reason It is not absolute reality, but it is perceived and we are part of it, so it is not absolute unreality. So where do you place this world? Within the category of the indescribable. It is neither this nor that. Sankapya, Sangapi, Vyatmigano, Bhinnapya, Vyatmigano. Like that you find Satnapi, Asannapi, Vyatmigano. You find in the Vegachudamani Satna, Asatna. So Shankaracharya says in the Vegachudamani, it is neither real in the absolute sense nor unreal in the absolute sense. So to some extent this could be misunderstood. That is, this world can be misunderstood to be the absolute reality for the person who experiences it. Well, let us say, for example, for a normal human being who is not a philosopher, suppose you have in front of you a number of pots and pans made of clay. Somebody tells you, pots and pans are only different forms of clay. And because they have different forms, they have to be called by different names. They have to be designated different names. So in that sense, they don't have an existence independent of the clay. So if a pot made of clay is sitting in front of you, it is only clay. And before the pot maker made this pot, then also it was clay. If it is broken, then also it is clay. So even if it is sitting in front of you and you pour a lot of water in the pot, then also it is clay. Clay with a new form and new name. Now, this may look ridiculous, but this is the reality of Vedanta, or what we call Maya or Mithya. Now, to drive home this idea, directly from here, we are going to another very important text. It is called Brahma Sutras. Brahma here doesn't mean Brahman. Here Brahma means Vedas. So Veda is one of the, Vedas are the supreme text, philosophically, spiritually, ethically, morally. In terms of authenticity, Vedas are the supreme testimony, the supreme authority for everything Hindu tradition, Vedic tradition, Indian tradition. If there is a conflict between two books, some book written in recent times, suppose you see these temples, normal monotheistic temples, they are performing puja and all that. So suppose there are 2-3 different temples and there are different conflicts of opinion, the worship should be done this way or that way. So what they are supposed to do, they may not do all the time, is they should resolve the conflict or different opinions by referring to what Vedas state. And differences in terms of opinions or rituals, philosophical concepts that you find in Hindu tradition, Vedantic tradition, are all due to the differences at the level of, not Vedas, at the level of constitutional books called Smritis. So this will give an explanation. If you look at the Hindu canon, Vedantic, Hindu philosophical canon, there are 3 categories of canons or canonical literature. One is the Vedas. Another word for Vedas is Shruti. Shruti actually means something that you learn by hearing, not just by reading. So there are different definitions of these Shrutis or Vedas. Yes, H-R-U-T-I or yes, R-U-T-I, Shruti or Vedas. Different definitions depend upon different schools of philosophers. The Mimamsakas, the ritualists will tell you, Amanayadi Udishri Dharma Anayanadi Amanayaha. Amanaya is another synonym for Vedas. So, a book which teaches us about dharma, about practices, rituals, performance of different rituals. That's the meaning of dharma here. That is Amanaya or Veda. But Shankaracharya will say, Brahmadinam Paramatmanam Labhanda iti Veda. Books from which you understand about absolute reality, that is Veda. So, because Shankaracharya considered Upanishads as the supreme authority, so the most precious, the most important, the gist of Vedas according to Shankaracharya is Vedanta or Upanishads, which teach you about the universal spiritual oneness of existence, the unity and oneness of existence. It is about Advaita Vedanta. So, whenever there is a conflict between Vedas and other books, you have to listen to what the Vedas say. So, in fact, there are different verses which describe this, which reveal this supreme authority of the Vedas. Sudhi smriti virodeshu sridhareva giriyasi avirodetu sadakaryam smartam vaidikavatsada. This is Javala Smriti. And then Sudhi smriti purananam virodo yatra drishyate tatra saudam pramanam sya tayodaide smriti vardi vyasa smriti. Yadishtam hi vedeshu dadashtavyam smrtau kila ubhabhyam yatna drishtavyam tat puraneshu kadhide Sudhi smriti Sudhismriti Puraneshu Virodeshu Parasparam Puram Yadi Beliyasya Idi Jnana Vido Vidhu Nyaya Vido Vidhu. There are different versions. This is Abastamba. Abastamba Smriti. Smriti means different constitutions. For example, you have US Constitution, Indian Constitution, different constitutions of different countries in the world. So, like that, in ancient India, there were 18 different books which were more like constitutions. Some of them have very elaborate interpretations of the principles of justice behind property succession, like Yajñavaka Smriti with commentary Midakshara, Jimudavahana. There are very important constitutional masterpieces in ancient India. Anyway, I am not going to, if you are interested, some of you may be constitutional experts, you can ask questions during interaction. It's a different subject. So the point is, the supreme authority in Hindu Vedantic tradition is Vedas. So Brahma Sutra is called also Vedanta Sutras. It means, Sutra means a pithy statement. A statement, very brief statement, Sutra. So, Brahma Sutram it is called. So, Sutram can also mean a thread. But here it means a brief statement. As I am going to repeat some of the sutras we are going to discuss next week onward. They will understand what sutra implies. So the point is, Vedanta Sutras are altogether there 554, 555, little difference here. Vedanta Sutras. And these Vedanta Sutras were written by Badarayana. And it had many commentaries. All the great Vedantic scholars have written commentaries. The most profound, the most authentic, and the earliest available existing commentary is by Shankaracharya from 8th century. These Vedanta Sutras or Brahma Sutras, same name, they are very ancient. And it is obvious from Shankaracharya's commentary, who refers to many other commentaries belonging to pre-Shankarite times. It's obvious that there were many commentaries, but the most rewarding study is the study of Shankaracharya's commentary. Now, it may take several years for you to study the entire book, which I myself took several years. But what we are going to do in this context is to study 4 of these sutras. So remember, we have got more than 554 sutras, 54, 55. Some minor difference in terms of calculations. But anyway, of which we are going to study only 4 of them. But the greatness of Shankaracharya was that he condensed the whole world of Vedanta in his commentary on 4 of the first 4 sutras. That is, Adhado Brahmajijnasa, Janmadisetaha, Shastrayonitva, Tattu Samannayat. 4 sutras, which actually deal with For example, jijnasa, the desire to know why we should study Vedanta. And then what is its definition? And why do we consider the scriptures as the authentic source? And the harmony. I mean, how different Vedic statements, Vedantic statements, primarily Upanishadic statements, converts and harmonize, are got converts and harmonized, synthesized in Advaita Vedanta. I mean, Shankaracharya wants to show that, in short, all the important Vedantic statements, if you take them together, they focus on one single idea of Advaita Vedanta, which tells us the fundamental spiritual oneness, a unity of existence. So I don't mean it's humanity. The whole creation, not the creation itself, is an incomplete, very, very inadequate, very unsatisfactory word. The whole existence is one spiritually. And this is the central theme of Advaita Vedanta, central theme of Upanishads. See, it is this central theme that all the Upanishad statements are trying to arrive at. So these are the 4 sutras that we are going to discuss. Those who are interested, we can also deal with other sutras of other chapters. There are 4 important chapters we will discuss later. So, and these 4 sutras together are called Chatussutri, means something that contains 4 sutras, 4 statements. Sutras are Adhado Brahma Jijnasa, which discusses why, if at all, we should make an inquiry into the nature of Brahman. There are many things we can do in this world. And incidentally, when do we turn to something profound, something spiritual, something transcendental? After all, when do you turn your attention to Vedic poetry? There are many sensational things that you can listen to, and you can get lost and go crazy. Wonderful things. But instead of that, why should we listen to this transcendental poetry of the Vedas? Why should we meditate? Not with a definite purpose at empirical level, but to reach a state where we won't feel any problem in this world. I mean, the very idea of problem itself doesn't occur. How to reach that, how to bring our mind to that state of spiritual tranquility and contentment and fulfillment. For that, we turn to the inquiry into the nature of Brahman, inquiry into the nature of the ultimate reality. And for that, we need some spiritual characteristics, qualifications, a sense of renunciation, a sense of focus, mental purity, a strong urge to uphold what is real, and a strong ability, a determination to disregard what is non-eternal, what is against our spiritual progress, and also a strong urge to reach the highest spiritual enlightenment, moksha or liberation. We'll describe this when we enter the text. So, actually when you knock at all the doors, they don't open, then only you have the feeling with the urge to knock at the right door after experimenting everything. So, it is impossible for anyone to turn to Vedanta, to turn to this ultimate inquiry, what we call the existential questions that we described in Nasadiya Suktam. Only when we reach a level of spiritual evolution. It could happen as part of our own evolution, going through different cycles of birth, life, death and rebirth. So that is one thing. The second definition, second is mantra is Janmadi Asyeta. From where the entire universe emerges. It again, of course, it focuses on many mantras, primarily the mantra found in the Taittiriya Upanishad, that is Varuni Vidya is called. Bhrugo Vai Varuni Varunam Pitaram Upasasara Athigi Bhavo Brahmedi, etc. And then Varuna explains to his son. Bhrigu discussed, it's called Bhrigu Vai Varunihi, so Varuni Vidya, it is called Taittiriya Upanishad. It comes in the Krishna Yajurveda. Third one is Shastra Yonitvad, that means Shastram means revealed scripture. This is very interesting, this can create a lot of conflicts. On the one hand, we argue that spiritual experience is ultimate testimony. On the other hand, we give importance to scriptures. So why do we give importance to scriptures? Scriptures which talk to us about ultimate questions of existence and spirituality can drive all the unnecessary chaff, all the filth and dirt and trash away from our mind and fill our mind with a lot of good ideas, good thoughts, it can have the effect of purifying our mind. But to derive the correct meaning and implication from a spiritual classic, we should be ready for that. Means our mind should be ready for that. Actually, whatever book we read, we'll be able to gather and understand only what our mind is ready to understand. So, if Sri Ramakrishna himself reads the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, he will understand much more than what we read and understand, because his mind is at a higher level. So when we read a book, we understand only what our mind is ready and fit, mature enough to understand. This is an important thing. Then the fourth mantra is the supreme, is a very important one, Tattu Samannayat. So these are some of the examples of mantra. Of course, there are many other sutras, I told you hundreds of sutras. So that speaks of the fundamental harmony and the convergence of all the important statements of Vedanta on one central idea of the fundamental spiritual unity and oneness of existence. Now we can have interaction. So we can ask questions on what we already discussed, Nasadeeya Suktam, or we can ask, if you want to know more about this new subject that we are going to discuss next week, you're most welcome.
Swami, I have some questions about, were there only poets in the Rig Veda era, or were there philosophers who spoke more like with analysis and that kind of intelligibility, or were there only poets in that era who had realized?
Samhita itself, there are many very powerful, very articulate expressions of the highest philosophical truths. Fine, they were. I took this example. Actually, if you look from a different angle, the Suktam is a profoundly philosophical. It's idea, no doubt. Profoundly. So, most of these suktas, they contain very profound ideas. And there were great thinkers and philosophers who, of course, you find. Rigvedic times, the Rigveda Samhita proper, you don't hear about great philosophers like Janaka, Ashwapati, these are the philosopher kings whom you read about in the Upanishad literature, like Brihadaranyaka and Chandogya also you find. But Rigveda Samhita proper, you don't find about big assemblies or discussions are being held on, debates are going on, profound philosophical concepts. You don't find in the Samhita, Rigveda Samhita, you don't find that. Yeah.
You don't find it, but they did exist? They just didn't get recorded?
Yeah, of course, some of the sages mentioned in Vasishtha, Vishwamitra, and even this Prajapati, they're certainly great philosophers. Yeah, they're great philosophers. After all, Vishwamitra himself, who is the exponent of Gayatri, which is a very profound philosophical point, he belongs to the Vedic times. Many like that, quite a few.
How does the rhythm of the Sanskrit language, how does that support the meaning in the Nasadiya Sukta?
Oh, you mean how the rhythm? You're talking about the rhyme?
No, I don't mean rhythm. I mean the prosody. How does the poetic meter in the Sanskrit language support the meaning? You made reference to that, and I thought you might elaborate on that.
Yeah, Trishtup is the meter here. So it's a short poem. So you find this, for example, last mantra if you take, I already explained this last mantra. So if you look at this mantra, you find, for example, the last mantra. Iyam visustihi ko adhva. Now, very small physics statements. So, relatively short lines compared to Purusha Suktam and elsewhere. So the brevity of statements sharpen the philosophical focus. For example, the brevity of the statement. Simple statements, Yam Vishiti Kutaha means this mysterious universe from where this comes. You find many other Vedic poems much more elaborate. When they become too elaborate, the sharpness of expression decreases. So that you can find. So the brevity of expression is a very, very short, relatively short. In some of the Suktams have got more than 100, 190 sutras. In the last one, Aigamatya Sutta, Rigveda Samhita, which were so long. But this is very brief. So the brevity itself sharpens the mode of expression of philosophical ideas. And also Trishtup meter, Trishtup chanda is also helpful, being brief relatively.
The Trishtup is interesting because the expressions are pithy and brief and focused, but the count is longer.
Yeah.
So I found it interesting that the actual metrical count is not brief, but the phrases within the count are brief.
Yeah. Expression is sharp. See, nasadasi, no sadasi. So that's neither non-existence nor existence. So you can find tadanim. Again, there is no real verb here. Asid is of a verb. But at that time it's not clearly mentioned here. So Sayana has to come to your rescue. Sistehe prak. Before the beginning of the beginning. Before the beginning of the beginning. That's what it actually implies. So Sayana has to write so elaborately. Sayana's commentary, it takes long time for it. Very, very elaborate. Each of these mantras. So Tadanim is one word, but Sayana says, Bhuda Bhavya Prapanchasya Siste Prak. You can imagine. So this world means before the beginning of this world of plurality and this world of different elements. So the word Tadani means then. That's the real meaning in Sanskrit. But then is explained so elaborate by Sayana. So when a commentator has to write so much to explain one word, See, before creation, the poet doesn't say. That is Ayana's burden. So, tadani, srishtihi prak. So, that shows the sharpness and the depth, the philosophical depth of each expression. That's the idea behind. It's an example of this. Yeah. Remember, there are many earthly poetical pieces in Rigveda Samhita. Very, very earthly, but very profound. And also, you find many of the mantras. You know, Dwa Suparna, Soija, Sakhaya, Shivamiya Suktam. But only one mantra, which the whole thing is again repeated as part of Mundaka Upanishad, which is Atharvavediya tradition. So you find that the 4 lines which actually write enough for Shankaracharya to bring out a huge philosophical concept of Jiva, who is sitting like a bird sitting below, who is going on eating good and bad fruits, suffering and enjoying, pain and pleasure, slowly emerging, climbing the tree upward and finally reaching the bird above. So that means Dwa Suparna Sayuja Sakhaya Samanam Bhuksham Parishushyade Tayor Anya Pipalam Swadati Anasnan Anyo Abhichakasidi. 4 lines. That's enough for Shankaracharya to bring out this huge commentary. So you can find this. I mean, I mentioned this earlier. During Rigvedic age, language had not evolved enough, but philosophy had evolved much more than language. So, when thought and philosophy and spiritual concepts are so highly advanced and evolved, but language was relatively primitive, actually such poems will be more forceful, more loaded with meaning and implications. So, I should also remind you that many of there are many rigs in Rigveda Samhita which are very earthly. Talk about cowherd going, leaving the cows for grazing in the forest and they returning again. Like that, there are many such, the old pastoral culture of ancient India where people mostly lived by grazing cows. That is also there. This also is there. Yadha nadhyasyantamana samudre astangachandi namarupe vihaya tata namarupa vimuktaha parad param purusham uvaiti divyam. All the rivers, they originate, they originate from clouds, rains, then they flow in different directions, but when they reach the ocean, they transcend their plurality in terms of names and forms, So, yadha nadhyasyantamana samudre astangachandi nama rupe vikaya. So when they reach the destination, ocean, then nama rupe vikaya, they give up, they renounce their plurality in terms of names and forms. Tatad nama rupa vimuktaha parad param purusham ubayadi divyam. Like that, a spiritual aspirant, when he reaches the highest level of enlightenment, he leaves behind the plurality of names and forms. So in 4 lines, which is more profound than Nasadiya actually. So the first mantra comes in the form of Asivamiya Sukta, the Subarna in the Rigveda Samhita. But in the Mundaka Upanishad, one more sloka is extended as to complete the meaning. So that's supreme examples of the power of rustic poetry. The language is rustic, primitive, but ideas are grand and great. On the other hand, you think of the opposite. You have extremely well-developed language, but ideas are very primitive. Then you write a huge book, which is practically not worth reading, which won't inspire anyone. So, when language is highly evolved, as unfortunately the case in modern times, ideas are very, very primitive, mostly highly confusing. But Rigvedic poets were struggling for language and words, but at the same time, the ideas were so profound. I mentioned this earlier, Rigvedic grammar, Vaidika Vyakaranam is called. they have this idea that the same word can express and mean different things in different contexts, and also in terms of the use, the person who uses that word. Okay, thank you for the question.
Swamiji, you mentioned that the Rigveda Samhita is comprised of 10 mandalas.
Yeah.
Each mandala is comprised of suktas. Each sukta of shlokas. Is the word Rik a synonym for shloka?
Yeah, actually, but I have to use that word. I didn't use the word Rik all the time. Rik is the Rigvedic term. Sloka strictly applies only to modern Sanskrit. Sloka has its own definitions. But for simple understanding, for people, I cannot use the word Rik all the time. It's a Sanskrit word. Sloka is much more, it's a verse in English translation. Rik doesn't have a translation like that. So I use the word sloka in place of Rik. That's all. Same thing. But remember, slokas are always, they follow the rigid discipline of meters. But Sanskrit, Riks do not follow those meters all the time. They are very irregular. Vedic language is, Rigvedic language very, very irregular. Irregular in the sense they emerged long before Sanskrit language was grammatically standardized by Panini in the 6th or 9th century BC. So, much more ancient.
The Rigveda Samhita, the Aranyaka and Brahmana, they are all besides the Samhita. They come later in time?
Rigveda, there are many meters. Rigvedic meters are not as...
So I'm talking about the Rigveda. So you said the Samhita is comprised of 10 mandalas. Mandalas are comprised of suktas and Riks.
Yeah.
Rik is the lowest unit. What about the Rik, Aranyaka and Brahmana?
Aranyakas and Brahmanas can be sometimes entirely in prose. Some portions in the form of poetry, but sometimes even mixed. So Aranyakas and Brahmanas are not entirely in the form of poetry. No, the long passages are. Even Brihadaranyaka and Chandogya, all these larger Upanishads are also, they contain both poetry and also prose. So you can find. Yeah, according to the specialists who who make a study of these, according to them, we are talking about Upanishads, not Vedas. Not Samhitas. Those Upanishads which contain both prose and poetry are somewhat older than Upanishads which are exclusively in poetic form. For example, Kathopanishad is entirely poems. So many like that. Mundagopanishad, only poetry. Brihadaranyaka and Chandogya, you find both prose and poetical forms coming together. Even poems are not entirely regular. So they must be much more ancient than the Upanishads which are exclusively in poetic meters.
Upanishads, are they only in the Aranyaka and Brahmana, or they are in Samhita as well?
No, you see, remember, when you talk of Upanishads, there is also a problem. Some of the Upanishads are continuation or part of Brahmanas, and some of the Upanishads are part of Samhitas. So the exact demarcation, according to that's only possible conclusion we can reach, happened in the brain of Shankaracharya. So if you read Ishavasya Upanishad, for example, he talks about Ishavasya Upanishad's connection with the Samhita portions. The other part of the same text deal with karmas, but this part of the text has nothing to do with karmas. That's how Bhashya begins. On the other hand, if you look at Brihadaranyaka, which also actually is they have the characteristics of Brahmanas, but they're called Upanishads. So the safest way to conclude is the demarcation from Samhitas and Brahmanas on the one hand and Upanishad on the other must have happened in the brain of Shankaracharya. You can't say they may not have existed in distinct forms before him, because we have commentaries of Upanishads belonging to pre-Shankarite times.
Swamiji, I consider myself to have barely scratched, not even scratched, touched the surface of our scriptures. However, what amazes me is with so many of our smritis, Shrutis, Puranas, Samhitas, Sutras, and the vast knowledge, body of knowledge which we have out there. I'm really amazed that there has not been any contradictory positions which philosophers and critical thinkers have taken in terms of Advaita Vedanta. My insight I would seek from you is, has anyone come across contradictory positions within Advaita Vedanta which negate one position in, let's say, a Smriti to a Purana or to a Sutra, which clash with each other? And if so, if that happens, how is it handled and how is it taken care of?
Yeah. You know, it is a basic principle in Vedantic tradition. A Vedantic tradition means Vedantic traditions include 7 schools of philosophers. Advaita, Vishtadvaita, Advaita, then Dvaita, Advaita, then Shuddha Advaita, then of course Nimbarka, Vallabha, I said Chaitanyas, and Abhinavaguptas all together. So the point is, it is a basic principle that whenever there is a contradiction or conflict between the views of the Upanishads and the views of some Smritis, constitutions or Puranas written there, then you have to uphold the views of the Vedas. This is a central principle. It's much more directly employed during the performance of yajnas and yagas, where there will be conflicts, whether so many flowers should be put, whether it should be this side, the fire should be, altar should be this side or that side. Whenever there's a conflict, then they try to consult. But in modern times, you don't have that problem because Vedic rituals are not so very commonplace in India. So those ideas with not practical relevance at that level. But philosophically, there is one thing more important, which I should thank you for bringing up this idea. You know, most of the social injustices in India, Hindu society, like untouchability, casteism, or just excluding a large number of people away from temple rituals, all this happened because they forgot the central principle that Vedas or Upanishads are the supreme authority, not Puranas or Smritis. Because if you look at the Puranas and Smritis, they are highly divisive. There are wonderful ideas in them, but they are highly divisive. So I can give an example. When the Hindu code was being formulated in India, I think Lord William Bentinck was Indian British Viceroy. He invited lots of Hindu Pandits and to discuss, to bring ideas to perform the so-called Hindu code, Hindu law. And even before independence, in 19th century especially, whenever there's a conflict involving temple properties and all that, they used to invite Sanskrit Pandits to decide. So they were very impartial. The British jury system was very impartial. I don't say all the time, but there were instances when all this happened. What I want to tell you is, and then in many cases, they pointed out that whenever there's a conflict level of the Smritis, you discard them, you listen to the Upanishads. This is an important thing to remember. But frequently, because in ancient society, going for 6,000, 7,000 years, a lot of old beliefs and practices have already crept into society, not easy to reform. So what I mean to say, but another important thing is, you see, the Upanishads don't talk about different cults and groups. The Upanishads talk about our inquiry into truth and realization of one supreme reality everywhere. So essentially what you find in the Upanishads is a message of unity and oneness of humanity. Now, all the Vedic lawmakers were trying to create codes and constitutions for their times, so that the kings can implement these rules in society. But frequently, many of these ideas got corrupted, and many of the power and wealth became the monopoly of the ruling classes. This frequently happens in all societies. Frequently, I tell you, why should you go that far? Till modern times, an average Englishman won't be appointed to the state, to the office of the state exchequer of Great Britain, of the Supreme Court. Or a man who is not a member of the House of Lords will not be even considered for that higher position. We are talking about modern times, in modern democracies. This even after democracy system came into action. That's the greatness of America. For the first time, there was a constitution which really, at least on paper, in theory, did not make any distinction. So what I mean to say, all this happened in many ancient civilizations. This is the burden of ancient civilizations. Historically, I can tell you, in modern times, Swami Vivekananda, who first pointed out this problem and this deviation from the central authority of the Vedas. That is a running theme of Vivekananda's lectures in Colombo Del Moro lectures. He strongly comes out heavily on the orthodoxy. So you can find the Vedanta or the Upanishads also unifying, so harmonizing, but not as much this. But fortunately, I tell you, India's constitution is one of the most liberal constitutions in the world today, right now. All because of the enlightened members of the Constitution Assembly, and the most learned and the chief of Indian constitutional experts who framed the constitution was no less than Ambedkar, who came from a society, from a community who was not allowed to go to temples, and he was the one who framed Indian constitution. So, and it is so egalitarian, so democratic, and so broad-based. So, and that's the constitution of India today. So we have traveled a long distance. In this light, in this context, you can compare the place of American Constitution, the history of constitutional evolution of humanity. It was a revolutionary document. I don't say on that moment it came the law, it was really literally implemented, not at all. But a high standard was placed in front of you. So that's an important thing to remember. So today's India's constitution is one of the most broad-based, and even special privileges, reservations for the underprivileged, for the minorities, which itself was pushed in the opposite direction, extreme point, to provoke a backlash from the opposite side. I mean, so much of, even to the point of neglecting the majority, for the protection and special privilege and of the minority. So, to that extent, Indian constitution became so liberal, so broad-based, and it was framed by a man whose community was not even allowed to go to temples, and he was proud of his great work. So this imagine. Bobby, I'm very happy Bobby is fully appreciated. Bobby himself is a constitutional expert and also mainstay. We have one of our American constitutional experts here, one of the top constitutional experts in this country. Do you have something to add to this point, David?
I actually, you started the lecture with comments about why couldn't God would make such an imperfect world.
Yeah.
And we know from Vedanta that the answer to the question or the response should be, well, this is Maya, and we're encouraged not to focus on our actions, not these questions, and that religions regard this question, the imperfect world, as a mystery. But my question is why? Because to sentient beings, this is a central question. And Vedanta and Hinduism supplies many answers. Last week, we were talking about the origins of the universe. But why not this answer? Why does it remain a mystery? Because to people, especially someone in the justice business, it always attracts my attention.
Could you repeat once more the focus on the central point of
the focus is the God creating an imperfect world, and that is a mystery to us. And why ought that be a mystery? Why don't we have the answer to that?
There's no real answer, because you have to, in a way, we have to go beyond the received creation doctrine to get an answer to this. Because the moment you conclude that God did create this world, the way it is described in the traditional scriptures, so long as that is our primary belief, we don't really get an answer to this question. So, the Vedantic idea that the divine is present everywhere, that is the only solid foundation for morality and ethics. Because true egalitarianism and equality can exist only on the basis of spiritual equality, spiritual oneness. And that may not be agreeable to creationists. That's the main problem. Because the moment you talk about creation, how can the creator God exist in the thing that he created? How do you explain that? So, I think so long as you accept creationism as the ultimate concept with regard to creation or the humanity or existence, there is no real answer. Vedanta tells you that, interestingly, this Taittiriya Upanishad is when the Taddrishtva Tadeva Anupravishat. So, a kind of Taddrishtva Tadeva Anupravishat. God created this world, then he entered into everything that he created. So the idea is the divine is present in everything that God created. God is present. If God is present, then we can't do anything wrong. Then the very idea of God creating an imperfect world doesn't arise. This is not an imperfect world. So if we can see divine everywhere, we can't hate anyone, we won't be hated by anyone, then where is the room for accusing a God of creating an imperfect world? The world becomes a place for celebration, because everywhere this is divine. You can find in Sri Ramakrishna's Gospel, a highly enlightened sage came to the Dakshineswar temple. He was laughing, crying, and dancing. And then he stood in front of the temple and he chanted a beautiful Sanskrit hymn, devotional hymn. He was always joyful. So Sri Ramakrishna pointed out to his disciple, it's an example of a man of the highest realization. You are seeing the divine everywhere. You ask him about the problems of the world, he won't be seeing any problem. So what we consider to be problems will be perceived differently by an enlightened person. But remember, it is again a state of experience. But if we can always understand that the divine is present everywhere, then there is no room for complaint. In this empirical world, in the world of duties and responsibilities, and even your courtrooms, you may have to confront many things, many unpleasant things. Naturally, every noble citizen who wants to do his duty will feel a bit of a pain and sorrow seeing unfortunate things around. That's true. But behind all this, we should remember everything is the same. That should not make us inactive or insensitive, but everything is God's play. In this law of karma, rebirth, all these will come into play different roles. It's an important thing. So this is a state of spiritual experience. So once we remember that the divine is present everywhere in so many different forms, so many different names, there's no room for feeling unpleasant or Anything like that, you know. This idea. I mean, that's a Vedantic, that's only Vedantic answer one can get. If, I mean, at the creationist level, there's no real answer. It's a big dilemma that many people face when they confront men like Richard Dawkins. In every debate, he's the winner, because these religious leaders go to him with their creationist doctrine, and they don't have an answer for that question. Why should your compassionate God create all this coronavirus and all that? There's no real answer. Earthquakes. So Vedanta gives the answer, of course. Thank you.
Swami, I have two things. One is just in response to the scientific sort of or mathematical reason is, I think, from Gödel, who says that no system can explain itself.
Yeah.
So I think that mathematically you always need postulates or axioms that are outside the system to explain any system, which is true mathematically and also with the universe and the world, that you can't understand the universe from within the universe, according to Gödel.
No, that's true. Mathematics and physics will go together, but mathematics and life will not go together. And spiritual ideas are linked to our life and experiences. In life, 2 + 2 may not be 4 in life. It's always 4 in mathematics, in physics. Because the logic of an input-output link, it doesn't exist in our life. You do a lot of great things, but you don't get back what you expect. Many wonderful, good human beings suffer. There you don't find the 2 + 2, 4 mathematics law doesn't work here. So that's why we come to philosophy and Nasadiya, Sukta and all that. So that's a big question that David put earlier, So why? That's why when you enter higher philosophy, then it doesn't violate the rules of logic and mathematics, but goes beyond them, transcends them. So that's why the poet in Nasadiya Sukta, he doesn't give an answer. He gives an answer in the 4th mantra, and 5th and 6th, 7th and 6th and 7th mantra, he asks a question: who knows? Where did the world come? Who knows? How will we know? There isn't it. So on the one hand, it's a profound poetry, also profound philosophy. So that's the idea behind. The 6th and 7th verses conclude with these questions, the fundamental existential questions of the mystery of the universe and also human life. So he's also perplexed by this, the contradiction, the paradox of 2 + 2 not meeting, not coming together the way they do in mathematics. In life it doesn't happen. So maybe that's why it's called mystery. But then once you understand, once we realize that everything is a different expression of the same divine, then you don't see the other, you see only that one. I gave you the example of the great sage, wise saint who came to the Dakshineshwar temple. You may read the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, he was dancing. He was always smiling. And Sri Ramakrishna was perplexed. Am I going to become like this? And he asked his disciple Hridaya to follow him. They tried to drive him away by throwing stones, but testing whether this man really deserves an answer. Hridaya persisted. Then he gave one answer. The moment you don't see any difference or distinction between the dirty water in the gutter and the holy Ganga water, when you don't see any distinction, when you see the same, then only you have realized the supreme truth. And with that it disappeared. So that's why so you can see maybe the Vedic sage didn't reach that far. but he's asking, he's looking for answers in the empty void. So thank you for these very wonderful questions, and without your questions I won't be able to explain things. So I'm going to begin in the next session. I'm going to begin the discussion on some of these fundamental teachings of Vedanta, which is most profound and it totally different from Rigveda mantras, because clear-cut statements you find in Shankaracharya's comment. Very clear-cut, absolutely no, I mean, nothing mysterious. So we are going to discuss that from next session onwards. Thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu